Welcome to the Homegrown Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Hazelmeyer, along with my husband, Joey.
Good afternoon.
And together we hope to educate, inspire, and equip you in your pursuit of true nourishment. Before we dive in, I do want to thank our podcast sponsors, Ancestral Supplements. You've been hearing about Ancestral Supplements for the last few weeks on our show, but we have been using them in our house for the last several years. I love them because they source from regeneratively raised cattle in New Zealand. They are third-party lab tested for purity. And in our modern diet, we are lacking so many key nutrients, unfortunately. So I want you to be honest with yourself. If you are not doing a good job of getting in a weekly serving of organ meats, then it might be time to try an organ-based supplement. I love this because it's almost like you're microdosing these nutrients on a daily basis and getting in everything that your body is craving, everything that our modern diet is lacking. I personally love their beef liver. I'm taking their Fem Enhancement product, and I really am enjoying taking their collagen as well. My recommendation is that you go over to their website, ancestralsupplements.com, and just browse the products because you guys, they have so many. They have digestive enzymes. They have a minerals product. So many things that once you start reading the product descriptions, I think you'll find something that works for you that might be filling a nutritional gap that you're currently experiencing. And when you do try their product, keep in mind they have a 60-day money-back guarantee, and you get to save 15% on your order with the code HOMEGROWN. So if you decide to purchase something, DM me, let me know. I want to hear your experience. So go over to ancestralsupplements.com/homegrown and make sure you use code HOMEGROWN at checkout for 15% off. Today's guest is Ben Tzeel. He is a registered dietitian, certified diabetes care and education specialist, and strength coach who has lived with type 1 diabetes for more than 25 years. We have yet to do a diabetes-specific show on the Homegrown Podcast, which is why I'm so excited to dive in today. We've talked about glucose and blood sugar and things like that, but Ben is going to take us so much deeper into the topic. So Ben, welcome to the show.
I'm so glad to be here and so excited to talk about diabetes because that's what I do all day, every day.
I love that. Yeah. So start us off with your journey and your experience with diabetes, and we'll go from there.
So I was a little 7-year-old kid. Everything seemed normal to me, but over the summer before I went into second grade, my parents started noticing that I was losing weight. I was drinking a ton of water. I was peeing a lot, and it just, something seemed off. And so they weren't sure. My family had just moved to a different state. So they were thinking, could it be that? Could he be having a tough time adjusting? And then they took me to a doctor. I got blood work, and we were actually walking into Six Flags in the Chicago area. And first time ever in a theme park. I'm super excited. We walk in the gate. 10 minutes in, my dad gets the call, your son has type 1 diabetes. So that kind of set a real somber mood for the rest of that day. And then from there, it became a constant sea of no's. No, you can't have the birthday treat in class. No, you can't play sports with your friends. No, you can't be active or build muscle or do pretty much anything that you want to do except for live this boring life and count carbs. And I didn't really like that idea. So as I got older, I really loved sports. Figured, hey, I'm going to figure this out. Even if nobody's going to tell me, I'll become my own science experiment and work through this. And as I got older, fell in love with baseball, fell in love with weightlifting and strength training. And every time I go to a dietitian or a doctor, hey, how do I build this muscle? They would give me stuff that had nothing to do with my situation. Like one time I went to a dietitian that literally gave me a meal plan for an offensive lineman and said, eat this. And I was a baseball player who was about half the size of your average offensive lineman. I was like 15 or 16. And it really frustrated me. But then I realized no one has these answers. Someone has to provide these answers for people. And so I took it upon myself, went into college, started studying exercise, started studying nutrition, got a chemistry degree, and then thought I wanted a PhD in diabetes so I could start to demonstrate all this knowledge that, and do it in a research form. And then realized halfway through I wanted to deal with people. So left halfway through, switched to become a dietitian, and then figured, hey, I'm going to meet that void that people have. And most people can do diabetes and exercise, but not, diabetes and nutrition, but not exercise. Or they can do nutrition, exercise, but not diabetes. So I said, I'm just going to complete that holy trinity and be that one-stop shop for everybody.
Wow. What, before we dive deeper, I know there's a big distinction between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So you obviously have type 1. Tell us what that is. And then to the counter, what is type 2?
Absolutely. And so type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition where something triggers the body to pretty much just say, hey, we're going to attack your pancreas, the beta cells particularly. in your pancreas that make insulin. So your body just does not make insulin anymore. So you have to get it from an exogenous source. So whether that's through injections, through an insulin pump, you have to take insulin to be able to process your food. On the flip side, type 2 diabetes, I kind of joke that you're overworking your pancreas. Like your body has a demand that it needs for insulin, and you're trying to tell your pancreas, work harder, work harder, work harder, for what a myriad of reasons could cause that. But your body keeps trying to make it happen. Maybe you're taking some drugs from your doctor to help sensitize your insulin so it works better. And then at some point, your pancreas burns out and it can't continue with making insulin. And that's how some people with type 2 end up on insulin as well, because their body just cannot keep up with the demand.
Wow. Okay. And type 1 is always needing an insulin pump or injection. You always need an external source of insulin to regulate, because now, further question, explain insulin's role in the blood sugar dynamic. What exactly does that do and why is it so important?
So insulin, some people call it, the key to getting carbohydrates into the cell to be able to be used for energy. So you can eat carbs. Let's just say you eat an apple right now. You eat this apple, your body's digesting it, you break it down, you've got this glucose that your body wants to use, but it has to get it into the cell. Without insulin, it's just sitting in your bloodstream, which over time can lead to a whole lot of other issues, but it's just sitting there. You can't utilize it. The insulin comes in, it will then say, great, here, it's in the cell, use it for energy, go about your life the way that we would expect to use it. But as someone, who was diagnosed, before I was diagnosed and before I was taking insulin, I would eat a meal and this glucose is just sitting there. And eventually, your body says, I need to get rid of it somehow. And I would just pee it out. So people before they're diagnosed tend to lose a lot of weight because they're just eating food and they're peeing it out of their system. They're not actually absorbing any of the nutrients.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense for me. That's probably also why you're thirsty, is because you're losing a lot of water because your body's almost trying to flush out excess glucose in the body because it doesn't have the insulin to bring it into the cell. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is absolutely correct. Because I always tell people, even if your blood sugar is high and you've been diagnosed, like if I have a high blood sugar, your body's trying to have you just get rid of that extra glucose. And usually urine is the fastest way.
Wow. Okay. And it's your body's truthfully like protective mechanism, right? It's just we aren't catching it soon enough. So when you're looking at blood sugar, were you initially given the choice to have like a CGM? Did you have to do a finger prick? Like what was the initial treatment plan for you as a type 1 diabetic?
Way back in the day, or are we talking
Way
about
back
right
in
now?
the day.
Oh
Yeah,
boy.
way back.
Back in the Stone Ages. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So it was 1999. CGMs might have been like in their first clinical trials. Like they did not exist on a regular basis. So I was pricking my finger somewhere between 8 and 12 times per day. I was taking insulin injections. Pumps were starting to become more mainstream, but I didn't even get on a pump for another 3 years. So it was just a matter of every time I was eating, drawing up insulin, injecting it. There was insulin I was taking that doesn't even get made anymore. Like it was a time. And like my meter used to be so large, it was probably the size of like one of the ice packs you put in someone's lunch. And it had an ad ticker on the bottom. Like it would talk about like classes at the children's hospital, because it would take a full minute to read and you needed to gouge your finger to get enough blood.
Okay, so then fast forward to today. Now, what are some of the tools that people use to measure blood sugar, and how have those advancements helped us?
Oh, I would say just a tiny bit, right? So
Yeah.
CGMs, like you said, continuous glucose monitors, way more prevalent. Even people without diabetes are using them sometimes. And so those are great because once they're on your body, they're on there for somewhere between 7 and 14 days. There's actually a newer one that's implantable that can stay in your body for 365 days, which is
No way.
Wild. Oh no, it's absolutely wild. It's Eversense, I believe, is the name of the device, but it's insane. But so you've got these continuous glucose monitors can work with insulin pumps directly with an algorithm to help give you insulin. So you don't have to necessarily do all of the correcting. You only have to do some of it. You can still, manually dose if you need to eat a meal or have a snack or a correction on your own. But it can be a lot easier. Even insulin pens, like there are smart pens that keep track of your active insulin. They have a Bluetooth that will timestamp when you take insulin, so you know when you took your last dose. It's not to say it's easy, but it's a heck of a lot easier than it was 25 years ago.
So when you first got diagnosed and you are now having to look at every single morsel of food you're eating, what was that like for you?
As a 7-year-old kid?
Yeah. Like growing up in a household, how'd your parents explain that to you? What was your understanding of that?
Oh man, it was definitely tough because you're a kid, right? You're thinking, I just want to eat snacks, I just want to have fun, and suddenly every single meal became a math equation. And fortunately for me, like I was a nerd, so I liked math, and so I started getting to this point where I'm thinking, okay, I have to have this. I was also told I'd have a certain number of carbs per meal, which I it's still put out there and it drives me nuts because it's a bunch of BS. But I was told, okay, 60 to 75 grams of carbs per meal. How am I going to get to that number? Let me add everything up, make sure I dial up the insulin. And by about 8 weeks in, I was dialing up my own insulin. I was injecting myself. Like my parents were like, you're doing this yourself, kid, because you're going to have to figure it out at some point. So I was packing my lunch, counting the carbs, and kind of just hoping for the best.
Wow. That's incredible that you could take on that responsibility.
So the objective of counting the objective of counting the calories and the math equation is so that you know how much insulin to inject. Is that I'm reading that right?
Yeah, so with carbs, typically the main treatment plan tends to be like an insulin to carb ratio. So it doesn't happen for every single person, but for a lot of type 1s, you'll know, for example, your doctor may say you get 1 unit of insulin per 10 grams of carbs. So if you have a meal with 50 grams of carbs, you're taking 5 units of insulin.
Mm-hmm.
But that typically is it. I mean, obviously the doctor may not be perfect. You have to, finesse it after a little while, but ultimately that is what has to happen is you have to match the dose to the amount of carbs you're eating. And then protein and fat are impacted as well.
And if you mismatch, it's the risk of that is less absorption of nutrients, or is there something else?
That's a good question. So it typically is if, let's say you take too much insulin, let's say you miscount the carbs and you take too much, then you'll likely have a low blood sugar where you're going to have to treat that with glucose to get your blood sugar back into range. And on the flip side, if you take too little, your blood sugar is going to go higher. You may have a malabsorption of some of the nutrients, but you're also going to likely feel lousy and need more insulin to bring it down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're trying to stay level and steady to maintain a blood sugar level that's not going to be too low and not too high. So I need to go back a little bit to make sure I understand type 1 versus type 2.
Yep.
And again, I'm going to say what I interpreted and then just correct me because I'm sure I'm wrong. So I interpreted type 1 being something that you almost discover. It's like, man, this wasn't your fault. This is something that happened. We don't know exactly why it happened, but you have type 1 diabetes. And then I was interpreting that type 2 meant that like you maybe were doing something on a regular basis that caused you to develop this issue or this challenge or this you aren't producing insulin as a result of working your pancreas too hard is kind of what I heard. Is that right?
I'd say you're pretty close. So with type 1, we don't know what caused it still. The expectation is it's some sort of viral, mechanism kind of starting it out. But whatever it does, it kind of triggers this response in the body. Maybe it's dormant in your body and then suddenly it's activated. Once it's activated, then everything just like the pancreas is starting to basically just get attacked by the rest of the body. And then over time, it could be, 3 months, it could be 6 months. Your pancreas just stops making insulin.
Got it.
So type 2, yeah, you go. I'm sorry.
And both have the same like risks. Yeah. So I'm thinking of I know somebody that had passed away with diabetes. And I don't even actually know how that happened. I was young when it happened. It was very crazy. And we were just like, it was my grandfather's friend. And so both type 1, type 2, same risks, same kind of like once it's in effect, I guess is it treated and viewed the same, or is there any other variations?
So it's similar enough, which is why I think they call them both diabetes. But type 2, when people say, "Oh, I can reverse my type 2," that's because your pancreas is still working. It's just not working well enough.
Got it.
So let's say somebody, I'm making all of this up, but let's say somebody's 50 pounds overweight. They're on a bunch of medication because their blood sugar is running high because they're not making enough insulin. If they're able to change their lifestyle and lose a bunch of the weight, most often, their medication needs to come down, and then they can go right back. And they said, "Oh, I reversed my type 2 diabetes because it never stopped working." And type 1, your pancreas is just done. It's kaput.
Got it. Sorry, I'm asking dumb questions. I'm sure you guys already knew. You already knew all this, and a lot of people probably listening are like, "Joey, like we get it. We all know." But so final question, and this is just again, this person that I knew would carry around like orange juice, and so is that because now I'm starting to as I'm talking with you right now, I'm starting to put pieces together myself, right? Is that because the threat of a major blood sugar drop can be addressed with just consuming like the orange juice? Is that what that was for?
That's exactly what that's for. So
Got
if you
it.
have a low blood sugar, you have to have glucose to be able to bring it back into range. So
Got it.
that's usually, juice is more broken down. Sometimes people like glucose tablets because it's just straight glucose. They'll just immediately hit the bloodstream. But something quick to bring you back into range is always the move, because if it starts to drop really, really, really low, that can end up life-threatening.
Got it. Okay. Sorry.
No, I
These
think
are
this
great
is
questions.
good. The thing that I keep thinking of is like blood sugar for the vast majority of people who don't face a diabetes diagnosis is not ever considered in their overall health and wellness. And I think that is a mistake, because I think so many of us have crazy blood sugar spikes and dips that we are not aware of. And we're kind of like, well, we don't have a diabetes diagnosis, so it's fine. Don't worry about it. Something that I learned after wearing a CGM for 8 weeks is that the foods I was eating, even on a real whole foods diet, there were some times where I wasn't pairing my energy input to my energy output. And so I would be eating something that may be really rich in glucose and then like sitting down on my computer and typing, whereas I should have been maybe going for a walk first, or I should have paired that with a protein or a fat first. And so I understood really quickly, oh, there's ways to manipulate how this blood sugar impacts my body, or how this, glucose from this food impacts my body's blood sugar. And so that's, I think, where the conversation gets really interesting in our own sort of like agency around how we can manipulate that. And you mentioned earlier how when you were first diagnosed, they were like, eat carbs at every meal. And you kind of mentioned that that's not how you view it anymore. So I'd love to hear
No.
your opinion now and how that's changed, and what your approach is to diet today.
Well, and I feel like diet in general is obviously very individualized, right? Because like there's patients in our practice as, dietitians that predominantly deal with diabetes. We've got people eating 40 grams of carbs per day. We've got people eating 400 per day, and both are very well controlled. So I feel like
Wow.
everyone's on that spectrum, and you have to figure out where you are and where your body feels best, but also where your blood sugars are best. But to that point, I feel like early on in diagnosis, for whatever reason, someone like 40 years ago picked that carbs should be measured in 15s. So, 15 to 30 per snack, or 45 to 60 for this meal, or 60 to 75, because it was also easy to pair with the insulin in the early days of, insulin timing, et cetera. But now that we have insulin that works really quickly, it's not as necessary to do that. So a lot of times, if anyone's told out of the gate, we get a patient that says, hey, I was told by my doctor to eat 45 to 60 grams of carbs. One of the first things we're doing is explaining it's not necessary to fall into that bucket. If you want to eat, 34 grams of carbs, it is okay as long as your insulin dosing is appropriate. Or if your body feels better, you don't feel like eating 70 grams, you want to just have 10, you want a meal that's more protein and veggies, and you just don't feel like having it, that's also totally okay. You just have to know how to adjust your dosing to ensure that your blood sugar doesn't go too low or your blood sugar doesn't go too high. So it's very individualized. Like I think the record, I can't tell you the record I've had in one meal, but the record I've had in one meal in the last like 4 or 5 months, I've had 200 plus grams of carbs in one sitting.
Wow.
And it's crazy because people are like, oh my God, that's a lot of carbs. And it is, but because gratefully I know how to handle it, my blood sugar never peaked above like 150, and I was able to stay in, 80, 90 most of the time.
Wow, that's amazing.
If you're not watching, Ben's clearly very fit. And
Yeah.
and I wanted to ask, just, and then I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, it's
But
fine.
one thing that I'm curious about, it's hard for me to even visualize what 10 to 400 grams of carbs is. What would be like what would be like a 50 carb like portion of something? Like if we're talking about pasta or fruit, or like what are we talking about here?
That's a great question. I was going to actually use pasta as my example. So 1 cup of pasta is about 40 to 45.
1 cup?
So 1 cup of pasta.
Oh, that's
so
Cooked. You're saying cooked pasta.
One cup of cooked pasta, exactly, is roughly that. So or I guess you could say if it was uncooked, 2 ounces worth. So not as much as you'd think, but also, you could also go for fruit, 2 apples, about 40 to 45.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Obviously,
so 200 is significant then.
200's a lot. Like the time I remember having 200 was we went to this place in Nashville and they had just this milkshake bar, and my wife had been there years before. And I said, I want to have this milkshake. And it was, I sat down, I did a whole video breaking it down. I added it all up, and it was, I think, 203. And it was delightful.
How did you go for a walk after? Were you walking around the city? Were you sitting still? Like, how did you manage that much glucose in one sitting?
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I literally in the video was like, here's what I did to prepare for this. I trained my body. I did a leg workout because I knew that would boost my insulin sensitivity. And because legs are, one of the biggest muscles in the body, that's going to really boost it extra. I think we had already walked 15,000 steps that day. So another thing boosting my insulin sensitivity, we had to walk back to where we were staying afterwards. So that would help with the post-meal, potential spike. And then I also was factoring in, any fat and protein I had from the previous meal to make sure I didn't have a delayed spike later on.
Oh, okay.
So that's a part that people forget all the time is they're like, oh, carbs, carbs, carbs. But the fat and the protein can come back and bite you in the butt too. And that's something we really try to emphasize in our practice because nobody talks about that. And it's so impactful. You go to bed, your blood sugar is 120, you feel great. You wake up, you're 297 and wondering what happened. It very well could be that you had a high fat meal the night before.
So talk to me about that. Break that down, because how does fat impact your blood sugar the same way that glucose would?
So fat really slows down your digestion, like tremendously. So what ends up happening, and I tell people usually you have to hit a certain threshold of fat to really notice this. But let's say you go out to dinner, you get, I don't know, chicken Alfredo pasta. It's got a lot of fat. You've got protein, you've got carbs. Maybe you have, a side of something. Maybe you have a dessert. You have a ton of carbs there. So as a person with diabetes, my first thing is I'm looking at the carbs. Okay, I need to dose for that. I'm going to have that. But then that fat and that protein is going to slow things down, which is why you may not notice as big a spike right away. Or like when you were wearing your CGM, you might have noticed, hey, I had certain meals with protein, I didn't spike as much. But then with the fat, because it slows things down so much, I almost joke that like it holds some of the carbs back in escrow. It really doesn't, but it just kind of feels like that, right? And then 3 hours later, 4 hours later, you just start to see this little rise. And depending on how much fat and how many carbs you had, that rise can be, I've seen it as high as 300 points of jumping.
Wow.
People being like 80 and then they jump to 400 because they had so much fat and they ate so much that their number just rises and they don't know. And they wonder why they're waking up and their blood sugar is super high. So if you're not prepared for that, you are going to fall victim to that time and time again. And then you're going to hate eating out or eating at a restaurant because you're not understanding why you're having this delayed rise.
Wow. So is that someone specifically with diabetes? Like, would someone without diabetes, would their body be able to catch that? Or yes,
most of the time, yes.
Okay.
Because the pancreas is, very, very smart and very, very reactive to little subtle changes in, seeing the carbs. For you, no diabetes, you're probably going to be just fine. But on the flip side, for someone like me, my body's not going to know. So either I'm relying on an algorithm on an insulin pump to, have my back, which it will, but it may not do it to the degree that I want it to, or I have to do some sort of manual manipulation to ensure that it doesn't end up, going to the moon.
So have you kind of figured out, if I have this much fat at a meal, I know my spike might delay by this much time, therefore I change the way my insulin is administered, and you've just kind of figured that out because you've been doing it trial and error?
So the nerd in me, right, when I did that brief foray in that PhD, when I did those 2 years, all I studied for those 2 years were type 1 diabetes and the optimal macronutrient composition for blood sugar control and body composition.
Perfect.
So I was like, I'm going to have fun. So I would dive into these papers and start to see, okay, there were studies of people that had high fat, high carb meals, and they were on these algorithm systems, and they would check how much extra insulin they needed. So people all the time, I'll hear people say, oh, my endocrinologist told me for pizza, I need to split my dose and I need to change it. And sometimes it works, but a lot of the time they're not realizing your body will need additional insulin because of that fat. Even though it's not the carbs that's doing it, it's the fat that's causing that insulin resistance and slowing things down enough that you need extra insulin for that. So effectively, we've come up with a system that, again, it gets finessed per person, but you have to be able to dive in to the particular needs of that person and say, hey, I know it's going to hit at this point or in this window, wait for that rise, and then you have to hit it again with more.
Okay. This is going to be a really silly question, so sorry in advance, but is there ever an argument for you to just eat really low carb or no carb to not even have to worry about the glucose spike? What if you went ketogenic or something like that? Would that help your body with type 1 diabetes, or is that not really going to impact you the way I think it might?
No, that's a really good question. And a lot of people do. There's many people that say, I'm just going to eat, very low carb and I'm not going to have them because I don't want to deal with it. And I've intentionally, because again, I'm a nutrition nerd, I've eaten the keto life for, I think, two different times for a year and a half just to see what it's like. So I'm like, I'm going to do it because in case I have a patient, I want to make sure I understand. But with that, the problem is, first off, there's a lot of fat, so you're going to have some insulin resistance. But the other thing is, when there aren't any carbs, you're not able to spare the protein. So then the protein can break down through gluconeogenesis into glucose. So if you eat, let's just say, a bunch of steak and a bunch of, broccoli and, a bunch of other things that are going to add fat, your blood sugar can still rise because that steak will just convert into glucose. So if you're not paying attention, you're just going to shoot up. It'll just be a different time frame. It might be a little bit delayed.
So it's like the body is going to extract what the body needs. So even if you eat keto, it's still going to turn that protein into carb somehow through this. What's the term again?
Oh, gluconeogenesis.
Yeah, I was going to say that, but I couldn't remember. So that's a process, right? Or you can just take in a moderate amount of carbohydrates, like per meal or per snack, and then sort of like self-correct with your insulin as a type 1 diabetic. What about for type 2 folks? Like, do you help people reverse their type 2 diabetes through diet and exercise and all of that? Or are you mainly focused on type 1?
So we used to be way back in the day, predominantly type 1. Like I have type 1, and ironically, every dietitian on my team also has it.
Oh, wow.
Because I feel like if you don't live with it, it's harder to understand exactly what it's like to wake up with a low blood sugar at 2 a.m. and you want to eat the whole fridge.
Yeah.
So that's been really, really cool and a blessing. But with type 2s, we've had a lot more of them in the last probably year or two. And with them, we absolutely will. If we can have the possibility of reversal, we will do everything in our power to make that happen. And typically, nutrition is going to be number one. Exercise will be, 1B. And then if they're on medications, helping them understand why they're on them, what they're doing. And even if we can't get rid of all of them, at least having them reduce the dose over time and increasing their insulin sensitivity is going to be paramount. But a lot of times, like some of them will want to go lower carb for the reasons we just talked about. But on the flip side, some of them still want to have, I want to eat carbs. I want to enjoy life. And so we'll go through, okay, what needs to be had at this meal with this kind of food? Are you having fiber? Are you having protein? How much are you having? Is it not just, I had a cheese stick? Like, okay, what else are you having to make sure it's substantial enough? And then going through glycemic index, all that stuff to make sure they understand what might spike them and what won't.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you talk about how your diabetes is like a muscle you can train. And I love this analogy, and I want you to unpack it for us because you even mentioned it earlier about when you were preparing for that like 200 glucose meal of the milkshakes, right? Like you had done things that were intentional around that. So what do you mean by diabetes being something that you can kind of train and work with?
So if we use the gym analogy with it, right? So if you go into the gym, you've never worked out before, you're going to train, let's just say you're focusing on biceps to make it super easy. You're going to train it. You're going to probably struggle the first few times. You're going to struggle over time. But as you continue being consistent and saying, hey, I've got more repetitions, I'm starting to increase the weight, I'm starting to notice that there's a difference here, the weights go up, you can do more reps, you can hold, have more time under tension. It's the same thing with diabetes. As you do things more often, hey, I'm going to expose myself to this uncomfortable situation of eating in a restaurant. I'm going to practice counting the carbs without a nutrition label. You're going to get better. And as you get better between the reference experience, using other, resources, whether it's, a food diary or something else, you can start to then make better decisions. And over time start to realize, okay, I can progress from, I used to be scared of this, bowl of Cheetos to I'm now, able to go conquer a giant milkshake. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I was afraid of Cheetos. I'm just giving it as an example.
No,
because some people get very scared of carbs, like very, 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 like there have been people that I know who are like petrified of even having 10 grams of carbs in one meal.
Yeah. And that would be daunting if you're walking around and, you have to feed yourself 3 to 5 times a day minimum, right? And then to think that every bite you take could send your blood sugar through this undesirable like spike is frightening, or your blood sugar could dip, and that's also frightening too. So I can definitely see how that analogy resonates with folks. I'd say like also in our real food journey, I'd say it's similar. Like in the beginning, you want to just be really simple and focus on, just bicep training, like just focus on being intentional about like your main meals. And then as you start to get better and more build up strength, right? Or build up confidence in your real food journey, you can venture out. You can go out to eat, make a confident decision that what you're eating isn't going to tank your health goals, but also not carry around this weighty anxiety about it. And I love that analogy. Switching from the analogy portion to building actual muscle, right? In terms of like having diabetes and building muscle. This is something you mentioned earlier. What is the impact of muscle building and strength building for someone with type 1 diabetes, and how can they actively burn fat and build muscle at the same time while navigating their diabetes?
And I would say this, what I'm about to say will qualify for both type 1 and type 2, because I feel like muscle in general is one of the most important things that people with diabetes can have, because more muscle means higher insulin sensitivity at baseline. So you're walking around at a better level of insulin sensitivity. And then every time you train, you're also increasing your insulin sensitivity for somewhere between 24 and 72 hours, which is a pretty long time from just one workout. Now, obviously, if you train a lot, you'll, maybe only be at the 24-hour mark, but that's a pretty substantial difference in, the amount that your body is able to process carbs better and, use the insulin more effectively. So with all of this, I think the biggest thing with building muscle is people think, oh, you can't do it or it's impossible or it's really difficult. If you stay in range, if you're able to keep your blood sugar in relatively normal range the majority of the time, you don't have any disadvantage over somebody who doesn't have diabetes, because you're in range, your body's doing the same thing. If you have the right nutrition going, if you have the right training protocol, you have the right, volume, and you're using the right amount of weight for your body, and it's higher threshold than you're used to, you will build muscle. That's just by definition. But at the same time, it all hinges on the blood sugars. If you're constantly having a higher blood sugar, every single process in the body is dysregulated. So everything moves slower. The nutrients can't get to where they need to as quickly. The workout will suffer if your blood sugar is high, but also just the actual muscle building recovery side will be nightmarish, and you'll feel like you're slaving away to not get as good of a result. So that's why I always tell people, you can do anything as somebody without diabetes, can do. You just have to be paying attention to dialing in the blood sugar. Otherwise, not that it will go for naught, but it won't be as effective.
Mm-hmm. Are you strategizing how and when you're eating carbohydrates, fat, and protein to when you train? Like, is there a pre-workout meal that you're eating and a post-workout for optimal muscle growth? Or are you doing something else?
Oh man, this is for me personally. I will optimize as much as I possibly can. And for people, if they're newer patients, we may not want to, throw too much at them out of the gate. But for something like this, I love, like, if I know I'm like the milkshake example, if I know I'm training legs, I know I'm going to I have more ability and more wiggle room to have a crazier meal because my insulin sensitivity is so much higher. Like even my personal insulin needs, because of how I train legs, goes way down at that next meal. Wow. So there's been times where, like, I will say, hey, we're out of town, we're going to go get brunch. I'm going to eat a ton of carbs, and I know I'm not going to take nearly as much insulin as normal because of that workout. So absolutely. And faster acting carbs post workout for anybody, I feel like, is usually a pretty reasonable thing. So I always tell people, oh, you want to have, something fun, work out. And then you've got a better likelihood of having more wiggle room that you may not go as high after the fact, as long as your dosing is pretty close.
Okay, so working out before the carb intake is what's key too. What happens if you eat carbs and then work out after?
So if you're on insulin, that can be a slippery slope, because insulin, like, let's just say it's rapid acting, like most people, with diabetes are taking, that will start to kick in about 15 minutes, but it will peak in 45 to 60 minutes. Okay. So if you eat at noon and then you decide to go work out at 1 o'clock, your insulin may be at its absolute peak. And now, because you're working out, that insulin sensitivity is going to shoot up. You might have taken 3 units. That may behave more like 6 units, and your blood sugar falls off a cliff.
Wow. Okay.
So you want to be really careful that you're not like sabotaging your insulin response by doing something that, like, the muscle, from my understanding, it's like the muscle like saps up the glucose, right? Like when we demand things, when we demand a lot from our muscles, that can help draw in the glucose. Is that why you say that insulin sensitivity increases when you are post-workout, because your muscles are just fatigued and they're broken down? Like, what is that actual mechanism that's causing that insulin sensitivity to increase?
So if we're going to get real dirty for a second, so there's like technically it's like a calcium modulated like glucose uptake mechanism. So you can take up glucose through exercise without insulin. Okay. So even someone with diabetes, when you're working out, you have these GLUT4 receptors. They come up to the surface of the cell. They will suck in all this glucose that's there, which is a lot of times how people can end up with a low blood sugar, because if they're working out, well, I've got all these receptors. I've got glucose in the blood. It's really accessible. Let me pull it into the cell. Suddenly your blood sugar was 120. Now it's 55. But on the flip side, like what you were saying, right, with, hey, I've got this, I'm doing this workout, and, afterwards, why am I so insulin sensitive? You have all these receptors still up on the cell. And if you're taking insulin because you eat something, now you've got even more, because insulin will also tell those receptors to pop up to the surface of the cell. So you've got 2 things working in your favor. So whether it's before or after, you're going to have double the fun of the GLUT4 receptors popping up. It's just a matter of how much also active insulin you have. So a lot of times people will tell people, hey, if you're going to eat and then you're going to work out, you might want to consider adjusting your dose beforehand so you don't take as much insulin because it's going to get stronger because of the workout.
Okay. Now, we're getting really technical, but we're getting really personal, I would say. Say you're
Sure.
working out for like an hour. Do you feel like you need to eat something? Like, do you need to have like an intra workout, like drink or glucose hit? Or is it not enough to where your muscles are taking in too much and your blood sugar's not going to take?
Me personally, I don't really feel like an hour is going to be anything crazy. But if you told me, hey, we're going to go on a 3-hour hike, absolutely. Because if you have a longer duration activity, your body is obviously burning through all the glycogen. It's got all these glucose receptors at the surface. And if you're not having something at relatively consistent intervals, maybe whether it's 45 minutes every hour, you're going to eventually end up with a low blood sugar. Even if everything's perfect going in, hour and a half in, you may fall off a cliff because you run out of reserves from your body.
Okay. So in that instance, it's more of a time variable than it is like intensity. Like if you were hitting the gym doing like a CrossFit thing for like an hour, you could probably manage that. But if you push it longer for a longer period of time, you'd need to supplement with something glucose rich to keep your blood sugar up. Am I understanding that correctly?
I would say for duration, absolutely. Intensity sometimes has the opposite effect. So like CrossFit, for example, a lot of people that we've worked with, they'll notice their blood sugar spikes because they're telling their liver, because they have so much intensity, their liver's like, you need energy, you need it now. Here's a bunch of glucose, go. So then they end up with, oh, I walked in, I was 135, and they leave and they're 250 because they have so much of a glucose dump. So there's that aspect of things too.
Okay, so I want to unpack that a little bit because I do remember when I was doing my CGM, when I would weight train, not in a CrossFit style, but just like weight train, my glucose would dip. When I did cardio, like run, my glucose would spike, right? Because my body's like, you need energy. What are the implications then for a type 1 diabetic going into the gym? Did they need to eat something pre or post or manage insulin differently if they're doing cardio for like an hour? Like, just unpack that a little bit more for me because I think that's fascinating.
Oh, it's a huge part of diabetes management, and a lot of people have a tough time with it because of the exact reason, right? You're like, well, what's my number going to do? Am I going to spike? Am I going to drop?
Right.
So a lot of times, I usually tell people if the intensity is like moderate or low, you're walking on a treadmill, maybe you're doing, some sort of weights, but they're nothing crazy heavy, you're probably going to drift down. You're likely going to drift down. If you're doing something where you're 80%, 90% of your max heart rate, whether it's lifting, you're doing, super heavy, singles for deadlifts or squats, or you're doing something CrossFit like, or intervals, like, you're on a treadmill, you're sprinting for a minute, you're resting for a minute, your blood sugar is likely going to go up. It won't guarantee it will, but it may go up a little bit or stay the same. So that's historically what people tend to look for. So in terms of snacks before, depending on the workout, if it's, more of the moderate level or very like low level, you may need to make some sort of insulin adjustment if you're on it or a medication adjustment or have some sort of snack ahead of time. On the flip side, you may want the snack if you're lifting heavy for powering the workout, but you also have to realize that you have to be careful because that snack may also spike your blood sugar more.
Wow. Yeah. So you could be going into the gym thinking you're doing something good. You're doing a CrossFit workout. You have your bar in there because you're like, I'm going to need this. And then you don't even know that your workout is raising your blood sugar. So you don't really need that bar. Plus now you're super high. Do you ever have to administer insulin after a high cardio workout?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's how much that impacts the body.
If you run sprints, I've had times where I've actually, way back in college, I had a few times my blood sugar was borderline low. Like I was like, 72 or so. And I ran sprints after a workout to raise my blood sugar.
What?
Yeah.
And that was effective?
I'm not going to say it's perfect for everybody, but it can work in like a super dire situation. Like you don't have glucose on you and you need something, you could technically run a sprint and it would work.
And so what the body's doing there is that's taking glycogen from the liver and converting it to glucose that is now in your bloodstream. Is that right?
Yep. The liver's saying you need energy. You're sprinting. Here you go. Have fun. And then as long as you're not burned through your glycogen, that's exactly what's happening.
Now, did you feel like crap when you did that? Because I imagine being low blood sugar and then
terrible.
sprinting. Yeah, that wouldn't be. Can you imagine?
I can't imagine.
like high blood sugar working out too is also just as miserable because it feels like your blood is like syrupy, right? So like you're trying to do something and you're like, I can do this normally just fine. And I feel like I'm trying 10 times harder and not getting nearly as far.
Do you feel like a heaviness, like a fatigue if your blood sugar is like super high, the same? Okay.
Oh yeah. Like the oxygen just can't move as fast. So
Yeah.
you're trying to recover and it's just not happening. Like you do a set and maybe you need a minute typically and you need like 2 minutes and you're still not totally there yet.
Wow.
Meaning like your breath, you can't catch your breath?
If it's cardio, I would say breath is harder to catch. But if it's like lifting, let's say, and you're like, oh, I just did a set and I'm used to waiting for 60 seconds and normally I feel fine, you're just not even ready. Like you're just like you're waiting for like the energy meter to go up and it's just 60% there.
So when you do a high output, high intensity and your glucose spikes, your blood sugar spikes, does that mean that I'm just imagining when you start to come down off of that high, is it a really steep decline? Like, are we worried about like a major drop off sort of situation? Almost like I'm thinking of like a caffeine crash almost.
I think it really depends on the context because if let's say you did a CrossFit workout, there's a chance your blood sugar goes up and it will just sit there. But what you're describing sounds to me more like sports because we haven't touched anything from the athletic side. If you have adrenaline coming from sports, that will tell your liver dump a ton of glucose. But then when the game's over, your body's chilled out again, and then your number just falls off a cliff.
Interesting. What?
Any guy that's trying to optimize their performance is probably leaning in heavy right now. At least I know that I am. So adrenaline being accessed. I mean, I played sports a lot growing up, and today I don't have any competitive sports that I'm a part of, but that adrenaline kind of dump, like the things that can activate that. I mean, sports obviously being one of them, but I mean, what are some of the other ways that we're seeing that happen?
Like from what I've seen for blood sugar impact, stress, even just like work stress, relationship stress. I vividly remember being in grad school and I was in a dreadful relationship and I was in the middle of finals and all that. And I had a day where my blood sugar hit 220. I corrected. I didn't like, crazy stack my insulin, but I did it appropriately. I think I took like 15 units. It was some crazy amount of insulin over a 12-hour span and my blood sugar did not move. The moment I chilled out when the day was done, and just like, meditated, chilled out, my subconscious brain relaxed, I went right back to 120.
Wow.
That was all stress. That is how badly stress can just wreck you. And people don't think about it. And I'm like my number's stuck. I'm like, are you stressed? Oh yeah, I am. Well, that could very well be part of it.
Yeah, I used to, funny enough, whenever I would podcast, whenever I'd be on a show, when I was wearing my CGM, I would notice an uptick because my adrenaline is pumping. I'm on the show. I have to be on. I have to be listening questions and stuff like that. And it would be so funny. Or like I had to give a presentation at one point and I was like, wow, my glucose just spiked during that because my body was like, oh yeah, you need to be alert. You need to be like on it. We're going to give you a little extra fuel. How do you, this seems like you could manipulate your blood sugar from so many different ways. Like, how do you package this all into a manageable lifestyle for folks with type 1 diabetes? How do you coach them through that process?
So there's a lot of pieces, of course, right? And so with the people that have come through our practice, I think at this point we've worked with, 3,000. Like it's been a lot of people over the past few years, which I'm very grateful for. But a lot of it is, first of all, saying, okay, let's meet you where you're at. I don't want to overhaul your life right away because that's not going to be sustainable. So the first thing is let's see where you're at. Let's get a baseline. Let's get a baseline on your nutrition, your activity, your lifestyle in general. And from there, what are the little tweaks we can do to first improve your blood sugar, whether it's through nutrition, again, through activity, whether it's, hey, your settings are off, or you're always having a low blood sugar at this time. Let's walk through what could cause that. And then just giving the teeny little lifestyle tweaks that are going to fit into their life already. And it's literally that simple. It sounds super, super cliche, but it's that simple of, cool, here's your 3 things of the next few days. Hey, you did it. Awesome. Let's move on to the next thing. Because sometimes I would go to the doctor as a kid and they would say, oh, here's a laundry list of things to do. And I'm not going to do all of them. And it's going to overwhelm me. And so I tried to, when I built this practice, I really tried to say, let me take everything wrong that I experienced and that others experience, with their care teams and just 180 it and say, okay, everyone will feel like they're rushed through their appointment. Let's make sure we give everyone the total amount of time that they need. Everyone feels overwhelmed by, lack of information and they wanted more, or they're given way too much. Let's meet them in the middle and let's not overhaul their entire life on day one. And it seems to really resonate with people. And I mean, we get great results with our patients, which I'm grateful for.
Do you guys ever work with parents who have kids with type 1 diabetes?
Oh yeah. All the time. All the time.
I'm so curious how that conversation is played out and how you explain to the child. Obviously, you experienced this as a kid getting diagnosed. How do you walk parents through supporting their child through type 1?
Well, I think the first thing is just seeing, depending on the age of the kid, how much the kid wants to be involved. Because some parents will, be like my parents and kind of, not say they threw me to the wolves, but I got thrown in right away. Versus some parents will say, hey, let's make it more of a team effort. Or the kid's 4 years old, they're not going to do anything yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really becomes, okay, who is the main point of contact? Obviously, the parent has to be involved, but how much is the kid involved? And then how can we make it simple? Because the parent has to consider the kid's entire life, what the kid's eating, the kid's activities, etc., their own life, if they have other kids. And then on top of that, okay, there's this diabetes angle. So how can we make it manageable for the parent and break it down in a simple enough way where we're mainly giving the here's what you need to do versus the all of the science background. If they want it, sure, we'll absolutely provide it. But it's more of the here's the stuff you need to do. Here's the quick hits. Move on with this. And then once this is done, let's move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You say you want to have people be able to, quote, have their cake and eat it too, right? Which is like a common saying, but also with diabetes, that has a lot of implications. So I know you've probably talked about this so far in the show, but just again, reiterating how people can approach life eating all foods, but in a smart diabetes conscientious way.
So I'd say with it, a lot of times I'll jokingly call it, the 90-10 rule, where 90% of the time you're picking the quality options, right? You've got hey, I've got my protein here, I've got my fiber here, I've got my veg here, my fruit, my quality fat source. I'm going out of my way to make consciously great choices. But then the other 10% of the time, I want to enjoy life, right? I want to have my milkshake. I want to have, the occasional dessert. I want to have that meal at the restaurant that I know may not be perfect. But if I know how to build that into my daily targets of, what I want nutritionally, but also I can go break that down for the diabetes purposes, carb count it, protein count it, fat count it, and know that my dosing is appropriate, I'm going to go have that and I'm going to enjoy it and it's going to be glorious. Mm-hmm. So that's what I really wanted to emphasize with people is a lot of times they think, no, this food is off limits and they get scared of it because there's so much stigma around certain foods. The stigma is only what, the power you give it. You can choose whether, a cupcake is scary or a cupcake is just a cupcake that has, this many carbs and this is how I need to deal with it. And that's totally a choice. And it's something where a lot of times we have to really reframe and really train our brains how we want to view things and realize we can have it if we want. And ultimately we want to empower people to have options of if I want this, I know how to do it. If I don't want to have it, I don't have to have it. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. And so they eat the cupcake, right? So then what are you coaching them to do? Is it simply just figuring out how much insulin to dose? Is it also working in fitness or is it pairing it with other foods? How do you help them cope with maybe that glucose spike that they're choosing to partake in?
Well, so the first thing would be ideally if the timing of the insulin's on point, there's not much of a spike, if any. Because a lot of it with insulin is a lot of it's timing. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, I don't want to take my insulin 15 minutes early or 20 minutes early, but you're literally giving the food a head start to spike your blood sugar if that's the case. So a lot of times we'll emphasize that just out of the gate in general. But then from there, to your point, right? If you're having it with a meal, are you having protein with it to help blunt some of that spike? What was your activity earlier? What's your activity going to look like later on in the day? Or is it a day where you're super active? Or if it's a day you're on a road trip, it's probably not the best day to have that cupcake, right? You can still do it, but understand the implications of what you're doing and what else to consider and what might be a better choice in that situation.
Yeah. I'd love to hear just from your own personal daily rhythms, how you're viewing your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, your workout fitness routine. Are there things that you're tweaking just to make sure that your blood sugar is staying stable? Because I think that's helpful even for folks without diabetes. A lot of us our blood sugar is all over the place and we need to just really dial in healthy habits. What are some things that you found? How do you love to start your morning? Are there specific tips that you can give us?
I mean, I personally work out fasted, and I think that's more so because I like eating later in the day. And also I know from an insulin sensitivity standpoint, our bodies are way more resistant. So way more insulin resistant first thing in the morning. And I'm also just not hungry. So I'll typically not eat until 11, which that's just me, but I'll work out beforehand, insulin sensitize my body for the rest of the day. And I'll say, okay, am I focusing on, protein out of the gate? Absolutely. Am I trying to get at least a couple of veggies, in there? Absolutely. I love eggs, although eggs right now I feel like are the talk of the town in every capacity. But, eggs, veggies, all that, sometimes I'll have, Greek yogurt, peanut butter, something like that. So I'm getting quality fat source. I'm getting quality protein sources, not super high carb, through the afternoon, getting some sort of protein amount that will keep my muscle protein synthesis higher. So, from a recovery standpoint, I'm on point, but maybe I'm getting, a high fiber tortilla with, a bunch of chicken. So that way I'm getting more fiber in. I'm also, getting that protein in. Maybe I'll throw another veggie, or maybe I'll have a fruit at that point. And the evening will be when I'm most adventurous, right? I've got the most time to be adventurous. I also know at that point, insulin sensitivity shouldn't be a problem. I've gotten, activity throughout the day in terms of steps. I've already trained. And at that point, if I'm going to do something higher carb, I'll do it. If not, sometimes I just don't want to eat more carbs. And there's plenty of lower carb options that are great that I enjoy. And I'll just roll with it that way. But I'm pretty meticulous on, for me personally, I've got my, my calorie target. I, cycle throughout each day depending on the workout. Got my protein target, my fiber target. I do my best to hit all of those. Even if we're eating out, I'll say, how can I fit this into my life? Maybe I'll pre-log the meal, say, okay, now I have to fit around the rest of it. And I just try to make sure that food doesn't become the centerpiece of everything. It's just kind of there. I deal with the diabetes and just put it on the back burner and just live the rest of my life.
Okay. So are you tracking all your food like in an app of some kind? How are you doing that?
I use MyFitnessPal just because it's a very big database. So I know like if I've gone to another country and I can type in the name of the brand, like it's probably in there.
Yeah,
So
I love MyFitnessPal. I use that as well. I think that's interesting what you said of you're kind of like if you're going to indulge or eat higher carb, it's going to be later in the day for you because you have started your day with a workout to kickstart that insulin sensitivity. Do you think that can be applied to folks without diabetes too? If I'm thinking about when I want to have my richest carb meal, is that a dinner time thing or is that a breakfast thing? Like, in your opinion, how does that fit in?
I would definitely say if it's sometime literally after noon, so like 12 p.m. and on, but the later you get in the day, at least from my experience and from what I've seen with patients, you're typically more insulin sensitive at that point. Because first thing in the morning, 7 a.m., 6 a.m., you're having that giant cortisol spike, which is going to make you way more insulin resistant. And so as a kid, for example, I would have an insulin to carb ratio of like 1 unit per 5 grams of carbs when I would eat breakfast before going to school. For perspective, later in the day, I was 1 unit per 12 grams of carbs. Like it's that drastic and I'm not saying everybody's like that, but most people are pretty drastically insulin resistant in the morning. So I figure, okay, if I'm going to have a ton of carbs, I'd rather wait until I know my insulin's working more effectively and there's less of an impact and less of a need to be like, I'm just going to load up on insulin and hope it works. Because as a kid, my numbers were always higher in the morning because of that. And I didn't know any better. I was, 12.
Yeah.
So
I also wonder how like male versus female, because I know men's testosterone is supposed to be like spiked and highest in the morning and then taper off. That probably has something to do like your hormonal cycle versus like a woman's hormonal cycle. I don't know if it's different in that 28-day period for ladies or not, but I think there's probably some interplay between blood sugar and hormones, don't you think?
Oh, 100%. And the women's side of things, that's one of the areas where in the time frame we'll work with people. If somebody has their menstrual cycle going on, we have to make sure they know that week before, that 10 days before they have their period, exactly what modifications have to be done because the insulin resistance is unparalleled.
Really?
It's insane. Like I'm talking like 30 to 50% more insulin just for the sake of existing.
What? During that
Yeah.
luteal phase, they need to increase their insulin that they're taking in by 30 to 50%, you're saying?
Well, and it's not a guarantee on that number, but there's almost always an increase during that time frame because there's so much insulin resistance and the progesterone is not friendly for that.
I was going to say, what's causing that insulin resistance? Is it just the peak in progesterone and the lowering of estrogen?
That's exactly. And having it at the same time is just the worst possible situation because most women find they get their period, everything goes right back to normal again.
You know what? That's awful because the 7 to 10 days right before your period sucks anyways, just from like a mood perspective. And then to like have your blood sugar be off too and you're having to navigate that, that's not fair. That feels unfair. That's fascinating though. I'm glad I asked the question because it is insane how our hormonal levels can like play such a crazy role in our blood sugar. You wouldn't necessarily think those two are connected if you didn't think about it.
Well, even testosterone too, right? Like when men have low T, they can notice issues with their blood sugars as well, and they tend to run higher. Not every single time, but just because of that alone, the insulin sensitivity changes. So it's remarkable as to the changes just from something as simple as hormones. And people think, oh, so many things. Like there's over 40 things that can impact your blood sugar.
Yeah. And that plays a role in like your ability to put on muscle and burn fat. And so that it makes sense that it's all interconnected. Cool. Well, I feel like we've covered a lot. What's on your mind?
Type 2 diabetes, it can be reversed. It's something that I'm sure people, there's hope there that people have, and we want to try to kind of encourage that. It sounds like, what can people do to achieve that? You mentioned like diet and fitness, and why isn't it more common? What are some of the barriers people run into, and what would be the advice for somebody that's maybe listening to this? It's like, man, I'd love to see some remission in their future.
I think the first thing would be if somebody's diagnosed formally as saying, hey, there's not an 100% likelihood, you're not 100% sure it's going to happen, but at the very least, if you can make it as minimal of a part of your life as possible, minimal meds, minimal everything, that would be the best situation for people with type 2. But on the flip side, I think one of the toughest parts for people is you have to think about, and not to be stereotypical, but the lifestyle going in, right? There's typically a reason in terms of there's not a ton of activity going on. The food choices may be more convenience based instead of, well thought out. So I really think a lot of times one of the most helpful things people can do, type 1 or type 2, but for type 2 in this example, would be going on to something like MyFitnessPal and just plugging it in for just a week. Just be honest. Doesn't matter what you're eating. Doesn't matter. I don't care what it is. I'll tell people we've seen it all. We don't care. But plug it in there and then ask yourself, hey, am I getting an appropriate amount of protein? Am I getting at least, 20, 25 grams per meal? Am I getting fiber throughout the day? Am I getting those, the micronutrients throughout the day, like, the vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium? Am I just going for mainly packaged things that are just not serving me? And as silly as that may sound, just saying, okay, I'm going to focus on one meal. I'm going to focus on lunch, let's say. I'm going to fix lunch and really structure it out, nail lunch, then go to dinner, then go to breakfast. And suddenly you look back, you're like, how did I used to eat like that before? Like, it's crazy. And just that alone, that little teeny thing, and that's just nutrition. That doesn't even count exercise. You just focus on that, and it doesn't have to be hard, just one little piece of it. That's why I always try to break it down. I tell people, focus on one meal. Don't focus on the whole day. Just one meal.
That's great advice. I've been trying to do that too. Like, I go through seasons of tracking my food on MyFitnessPal, and I just think it's helpful because you can get into a rhythm of kind of eating the same thing over and over. So you kind of know, like, if you're hitting your protein or whatnot. But I do think it's helpful if you're in a new season, or like for me, I just had a baby and I'm like breastfeeding. So I got a lot of things going on, and I wanted to know, how many calories am I eating? Am I getting enough fat? Am I getting enough protein? Super helpful to dial it in specifically to the meal. And then also be honest with yourself and look at what you're actually taking in. Don't have shame or guilt around it, but just use it as your starting point. I think that's really cool. I don't remember the question I was going to ask, but
fitness. So we're setting people up with nutrition, one meal a day. Let's start there. Track your food for a week. I think it's just brilliant, right? It's baby steps. Let's just ease into the water. Because it sounds like, hey, maybe there's something going on prior to this that's kind of got us to this point, and let's start small with that rather than some major overhaul, right? What would be a good starting place with fitness? And I ask that because I think a lot of people are like, should I be just getting on a treadmill and running and upping my cardio? Should I be doing the CrossFit workout? Should I just be doing strength training? What are we trying? What's the objective with the fitness that's going to help benefit somebody that's looking to improve their day to day?
I think the biggest thing would be to, again, similar to with the food, figuring out where you are right now. If you're doing anything at all, if you're doing anything intentionally at all, or maybe you have an active job, really just assessing how much activity am I getting at this moment? Am I getting any strength work? Am I getting any cardio work? And from there saying, okay, what is realistic for me? What can I commit to each week for, the next, let's just say even the next 7 days? Hey, I can do 3 times a week for 20 minutes. I only feel comfortable walking. Start walking. Hey, I only feel comfortable being in my house and doing, a 15-minute YouTube workout. Starting there and just getting consistent with it, because you're only going to build up. You don't need to feel obligated to go run into a gym and potentially get intimidated by other people in there. Start in your house. Start outside. Just do something that's just a little bit more than what you've been doing. And as long as you're intentional with it, okay, this week you did 1 day of 15 minutes of strength and 1 day of, a 20-minute walk. Next week, can we maybe do, an extra 5 minutes of each? Maybe can we do, an extra day where you add another 10 minutes in, and slowly over time you've built up. You look back and you're at 5 days a week for 45 minutes and you're feeling awesome.
I love that. For folks who are on medication for type 2 diabetes, things like metformin and such, how are those things working with their body to try to regulate blood sugar? And can those mechanisms be accomplished just through health or just through nutrition and fitness? Like, how does metformin work, and can we mimic that with lifestyle choices?
So with the majority of the type 2 meds, they're typically just taking the insulin that their body's already making and making it more potent than what it is right now. So
Okay.
similar to your point, like how exercise can theoretically work is, okay, exercise, you have all those extra GLUT4 receptors on the surface, it's bringing in more glucose. It's similar to that, all of the type 2 drugs, roughly. There's obviously, idiosyncrasies between them. But in a nutshell, the goal would be, ideally, if you're able to do that nutritionally and really through exercise as well, ideally the need for the meds should come down because you're not having to tax the body as much, saying we need more insulin, it's not working, we don't have enough. Ideally, you're doing these other things and suddenly the need for insulin is not as high, your body's actually producing enough, and then the meds can start to drop off.
Okay. So your magnification of your body's own insulin is what the drug is doing, but you can achieve that through working out, like what we talked about, creating that insulin sensitivity in your body, and then choosing the right foods and the right food pairings to stabilize your blood sugar.
Yeah, in a nutshell, yes. And it's not a guarantee that if you're on medication, you're listening to this, that you're going to immediately fall off if your nutrition's on point and your exercise is on point. So there's other factors in it too, but at the same time, the goal is at least reducing it down. So it's a minimal dose. You need as little as possible, and then hopefully none at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think for folks who find themselves with a type 2 diagnosis, if their lifestyle has led to that, it's going to be much slower change. Lifestyle changes are always harder and slower because it's our day-to-day rhythm, it's our routine, it's our habits. And if we can bring something in quickly to help kind of mediate that high blood sugar, that's going to be helpful. So I totally understand like why people opt for the medication, but to your point, you're like, if we can wean that down to as low as possible and manage this and reverse it, like why wouldn't we want to do that? Because your pancreas is still functioning. Like that's the hope of type 2 diabetes, right? And like I think your body can heal, and so if you just give it the right tools to continue to increase that pancreas's function, it's not offline as it would be with the type 1.
Right.
That's super, super encouraging to folks. And, it's always the harder, less attractive answer, right? Oh, change your diet, work out. And it's not as easy. Like it's really, really hard work. So I don't ever want people on the show to like hear us talk about that and be like, just change your lifestyle. No, I understand that's incredibly challenging and a long-term payoff, right? There's no short-term gains with lifestyle. So that's really, really good information. Anything else?
I got it, dude. This is great.
Thinking? Yeah, is there anything we didn't cover in terms of diabetes, either for type 1 or type 2, that you feel like is really helpful and potent for our audience?
The only thing I can think of is, I know Ozempic's a very popular topic right now.
Let's talk about it.
I'd love your take on it just out of the gate, because it's thrown around these days like nobody's business.
Let me start. So I'm seeing it really prevalent now, in around my kind of professional circles, like at work and such. And I'm like, my initial understanding of what like a GLP-1 does for you, or the purpose of it, was initially just like weight loss, right? And so I was, I had this like vision in my brain of, you take this injection, and at first I thought it was a pill, and then like you stop eating and lose tons of weight, and then you kind of like convert your life and change. And then as I started to learn more and I'm starting to like talk to people that are actively using this, right? So now I know people that are actively using GLP, multiple people, a number of people that are using it. Their life doesn't really change a whole lot. And what's happening is that they start taking this, and the way they describe it to me, because I'll ask them like, hey, is it appropriate if I ask you like a bunch of, because like, I'm just curious. They're like, yeah, absolutely. And I'll be like, so, like what happens? Like, are you just not hungry? And they're like, no, not really that. It's more of just like, I feel really in control of everything I eat. And they'll explain to me like, I don't know how else to explain it other than that. And I'm like, interesting. And they'll say, I now view eating to be very much like, and I'm using other people's words, and I'm kind of paraphrasing. I view eating as like a a task, and it's almost more robotic, right? Of like eating and consumption has become very robotic to where I plan everything out. I go grocery shop. I don't have a whole lot of like cravings of things that I want to eat. And there's things that, you know, I could eat the same thing over and over and over and over and over, day after day after day after day, and just lock in. And in that sense, my brain has definitely changed. My emotions around like Ozempic, GLP-1s, these sorts of things have certainly changed a little bit, because I used to view it as this like really like ridiculous, I don't know, possibly harmful weight loss drug. But that's as much as I know. And so I'm curious as what you feel about it, Elizabeth, because again, I'm sure I'm off in some ways.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know a ton. I am always like very slow to hop on a pharmaceutical anything, honestly. Just my personal approach. If I can forego a medication, I'd rather forego it. So anytime something comes on the market that seems a little too good to be true, I'm highly skeptical. And I would say I still maintain that same posture. I can understand its use for someone who needs to lose weight and take control of their food habits very rapidly, like people who are extremely overweight who need to like bring that in quickly. I can understand that. For people who maybe don't have the same level of urgency, I feel like, you know, could we have achieved that? I guess that's the question. It might be insulting, and I'm sorry if it is, but like, could we have achieved those same results with some coaching, with someone encouraging you with healthy food choices and food education and fitness? While that might still require your own brain to like rewire, and you're going to have to fight those cravings. That's hard. I get that. But like, could that be the approach for someone who's maybe younger or doesn't have as much body fat to lose in a short period of time, or doesn't have critical health diagnoses? Is that the more healthy approach, or the more conservative approach than to just jump on a GLP-1? Because the thing I worry about is that you have all these young folks who don't have like severe health diagnoses who are taking advantage of this very effective drug. But then I read headlines like food manufacturers are working to circumvent this mechanism that this GLP is working on. And so now they're engineering food to like bypass that. And I'm like, well, is this going to be the next level of ultra processed food? Like the food industry is going to fight back.
It's like war.
It's literally war. And so I'm like, well, what if we trained our mind and our body? Again, I'm not saying these are really simple things. That's hard work. But like, what if we worked with a coach to train our mind and our body to have these same daily health habits versus going to the drug? But I don't know. That might bother people. I want to know your opinion.
Well, and I had a lot of your opinions at the beginning. Like when I first heard it come on, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. But ironically, they were produced for people with diabetes out of the gate, because it helps on the blood sugar side dramatically, like absolutely insane. And it's also, you know, as people with, you know, type 1, it's not necessarily always for type 1s. It's usually more off label. But even with that, like it's replacing certain hormones that like we're not able to have. We can't make them. So that's been huge. But on the weight loss side of things, everyone's just gravitating to them. Oh, it's amazing. And initially I would think what you thought, right? Like people just have more willpower. Like, come on. But the food noise, which is, I think, what Joey was describing, is people have described to me like, I don't feel this like this one patient I had described as lizard brain, you know, like it's telling me to go have, you know, Chick-fil-A. I don't have that noise anymore. I'm not having that urge that I used to have relative to before. And that's been really helpful, because then when it becomes more robotic, ideally, if you're using it as a springboard with the other stuff, with the nutrition, with the exercise, then you can really do the full transformation and ideally get to a point where you're weaning yourself off of it. So I think it's great as a springboard, working with a care team that has, you know, a doctor, has a dietitian. If you have diabetes, has a diabetes educator. So you know all the different pieces of it. But on the flip side, if someone's like, I'm just going to take this, I'm going to drop 20 pounds, it doesn't change anything. I've also seen it where they don't lose any weight, or if they do lose weight, they just gain it right back. And the studies are showing people that are on it and they get off it, they gain all the weight right back, because it was a Band-Aid. They didn't fix the underlying problem.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's my question of like, what happens when you wean off of it? Or, you know, I totally am with you. And if you want that sort of like extra boost to get you over the hump, to get into this healthy lifestyle, I can see that being a benefit to folks. And I'm not going to ever tell someone like what they should do in their own life. For me personally, I don't have a need for it. So of course I'm coming from a very like a biased opinion, but I totally see your point. And I think for you to say utilizing it in the context of having coaches and a care team who's going to build in the lifestyle, the fitness and the nutrition, so that you can sort of like shake the bad habits or shake the food noise that you were feeling before, and then have a more whole food, real food diet without constantly battling your brain and your psyche and your food cravings. I think that's incredible. I think we'll continue to learn more. I think it's
Oh, for
very
sure.
soon. It's early. Again, like the younger and younger you are, like I would be very cautious for like children to start taking this drug. But I think all of this plays into our culture's deep desire to understand whole real food, to understand the power of food marketing. And we need to be training our kids on this stuff. Like we need to be teaching them like, hey, the box with the My Little Pony logo on it isn't actually serving you anything. It's just marketing to you. So if you want a treat, let's go home and let's bake something together, or let's have a glass of iced tea, for goodness sake, because like that's great. But we don't need the constant ultra processed foods in our life to be happy and satisfied.
What is it that this drug is suppressing or adding that's altering us? Because if I zoom out from 1,000-foot view and I'm not getting granular of like what's happening inside our body, the effect of like, it's almost like a pill of discipline or an injection of discipline, like that would be good. And the only people that would be frustrated or annoyed with that are the people that are like, man, I did all this. I walked uphill both ways when I was a kid. Right. And you know, you've got it easy. And
That's true.
It's like, and that's not okay. Right. There's no reason for someone to be judgmental of someone else having a tool that you didn't have access to. Right.
Right.
But I think if we look granular and we say, what is this, the suppression that's happening? Is it a hormonal thing? And is there information? Is there a lot of information that we have about what the impacts of that can cause or have on our bodies?
So from what I'm aware of, it pretty much just alters the hunger hormones. So you are just you're not going to feel as hungry. So the ghrelin, and you're going to feel fuller faster.
Okay.
So a lot of times I've had people where they'll start on it and they'll be like, I ate, and I'll look at their food diary. I'm like, you ate like a third of what you're used to. And they're like, I'm just not hungry, because their body physically does not crave the food. So similarly, you know, a lot of it's psychological with what it's doing, but the actual hormones of the hunger are just not allowing the person to feel as hungry when they do eat. They're like, I'm stuffed. They'll eat like, you know, half of what they're used to. I feel full, which you also have to make sure that they're not eating too little either, because that's another problem, which I have to, you know, as a dietitian, have to pay attention to. But the biggest thing is because it's altering, you know, through the, you know, I guess the brain gut axis, it's altering the relationship there. People are just not interested. Like, so not only is the food noise gone, but they're not as interested because they're so full so quick. It's like I had one meal with someone who was on one. They're on Manjaro, and they had it for just a little while, and I had eaten with them before. And they ate, right, and they were like, they ate, and I was like, oh, I'm expecting them to, you know, finish, and they're just done. And like, oh, I'm good. I'm gonna take the rest of this home. I'm like, well, that's really good change, but like that's not what I was expecting at all. And I'm just straight up not hungry.
Now, is that only useful for people who need to lose weight? Like, isn't chronic under eating bad for us in the long run? Or is it okay if we have fat stores we can burn up?
Oh, that's so tough. And so it's tough because like you see all the really sensationalized things where like, oh, this person, you know, barely ate, but they had, you know, they were 900 pounds and they had to lose a bunch of weight. And like, if you're medically supervised, it's kind of like, but like in my eyes, if somebody's legitimately, you know, eating too little, I have to watch for the signs of malnourishment, even if they have that extra body fat to burn, because that can happen. Like if you're not getting enough of the micronutrients, and even just that minimum threshold of protein, for example, is just one of the nutrients that can lead to a lot of issues with the body. And I mean, there are people that I actually did a bunch of my dietetics training in an outpatient eating disorder clinic, and there were people there that were very large. I'll just leave it at that. And they had diagnosed anorexia. They would not eat. And so you would think, oh, they're going to lose a bunch of weight. But that whole relationship with food got so dysregulated that they just weren't eating. And we had to make sure that they were okay, because they were eating 400 calories a day, if that.
Wow.
But they were, you know, 100 pounds overweight.
So with That's crazy. And I love this conversation because I'm bringing up just, I'm crossing over into other understandings to help me try to better understand Ozempic and just GLP-1s in general, and like this hunger hormone suppressant, which I don't know anything about that hormone. I you know what, if someone would have quizzed me and said name as many hormones as you possibly can, I don't know that I would have said there was one about hunger. I just didn't know.
Ghrelin, is that what it's called?
Oh, ghrelin. Ghrelin, I always joke, is like the gur, like your stomach's growling. So ghrelin's the hunger hormone, like the one that like you feel hungry, and leptin's the one where you feel full.
That is so funny.
I got that.
So those two hormones. So I have in past conversations been led to believe that hormone suppression in other instances can have negative impacts. And so my gut tells me to be weary of something that's going to suppress, alter, change hormones in ourselves. Have we seen any negative side effects of these ghrelin and what was the other one? Leptin suppression and or altering?
I would say I'm probably not the best person to ask on that one.
Okay.
I know to a certain level, and then I know that some of the stuff you're describing was stuff that I read when I was doing the PhD stuff, but that was 2016. Totally. So like it's been a minute. So what I don't want to do is give, wrong information. But I would not be surprised if there were some potential long-term impacts of the GLP-1s or just anything with a hormone suppressant that can lead to, leptin issues or leptin dysregulation or, ghrelin on the other hand. I would not be surprised at all. But I think with some of the GLPs, they're too new that we don't know we don't have the data for the 20-year study or the 30-year study. And I think there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out over the next decade it may not be great. It may not be any harm at all, but I think we're going to have a lot more insight into making better decisions. And
that's how it works with any kind of convenience item, right? And we would be, you said something like too perfect to be true or too good to be true or something like that. And you're kind of weary of that. And I'd say that's healthy. That's a healthy way to look at it. And also there are tools of today that depending on what your situation looks like, man, you're going to have to make a decision to take control of your health to optimize what that looks like. And Ben having some folks that are taking this and seeing some, great results. And you said the word, which I love, as a springboard, right? There's a purpose, there's an objective, there's a goal, right? And if we're going to bring a tool into the mix, it's to support something that we're working on together. And it's not necessarily going to be the magic pill that's going to change everything and solve the problem. And I like that approach. I like walking into it with that kind of mindset, I guess.
Let me ask you this, Ben. For the people that you have seen and coached through the process of using a GLP-1, would they have been able to achieve the same results had they not utilized the drug?
It's such a good question because I've seen it from both ends, where I've seen the people that have no success with it. And then I've seen the people that have lost 140 pounds, or I have another one that's at like 99 right now. So she's waiting to cross 100. And so for some of them, and I try to really, out of the gate, see if we can go without any extra, right? To see, okay, can we lay the foundation? Can we get things going? And for some people, I'd like to see some semblance of consistency first. And I can't prescribe, but some semblance of consistency, because then I know, okay, now it really will help be a springboard. It will help propel you further than you would go. But if you can't do those foundational things, I don't care if you're on it and your doctor gives it to you, it's not going to do anything. You're either not going to see anything right away, or if you do, you're not going to be able to hold it long term. And I always tell people with A1C and really with weight loss too, it's cool if you get to a great A1C or if you lose 20 pounds. I think it's cooler if you can keep that.
Yeah.
You lost 20 pounds, you can keep that 20 pounds off for the next 5-10 years. Like that's even cooler to me. So I would rather you be set up for success, saying you can do all this underlying work. Let's add this in, or consider adding it into the mix. Your doctor signs off. Great. That's when I tend to see people having a lot of success, and the people just jump to it out of the gate. They just want the quick fix. I don't want to do anything except for take a drug and hope it works mentality. And that never goes well.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. So it really does come down to the individual and their willingness to kind of like do the hard thing, but also be like humble enough to be like, hey, I'm going to utilize some help. And because I want to lose weight. Like the example you gave, 140 pounds or 99 pounds, like that's a significant amount of weight.
Oh, yeah.
We're not talking about someone that's like, I want to lose quick 15. Let me hop on this, drug,
Right.
obviously. So, and I also like that you need to be, I almost feel like even more dialed into what your macros are when you're on something like Ozempic, because you are eating so little. You have to be getting those macro and micronutrients. Otherwise, you're going to be starved from a nutritional level, which is not healthy. I do also worry is the amount of muscle mass that someone has before they go on a GLP-1 important for their long-term success. Like say they are, well, I'll just have you answer that question first.
I mean, I would say, like, of course, the more muscle we can have on our body, the better. But I feel like as long as someone's doing some sort of strength work, even if they're on it, even if they're not necessarily the most, hey, I'm not as in shape as I want to be. If you're consistently doing strength work, I think that's only going to help maintain what you do have. Because my bigger concern is if you're already eating so much less, first we want to make sure, ideally the weight that you're losing is body fat, and keeping the protein up will help that. Protein at certain intervals to keep the muscle protein synthesis will help with that. But then on the flip side, if you're going to lose something, I'd rather you maintain as much as you can. So just minimize muscle loss to me is the more important thing. I don't think you're going to build a ton, but I don't also care how much you have going in as long as you're maintaining what you have.
That's really good. That's really smart, because if you're just sitting there losing muscle, you're potentially putting yourself into a worse position as a result.
For sure.
Even though the dial on the scale is going down.
I'm actually really interested. There's this thing by Hume Health. It's like a body indicator or something. You stand on it. It's like a sensor, and it can tell you your. Have you heard of these things? Like it'll tell you your muscle mass and your bone density and your fat and your water weight. And I'm like, ooh, I want one of those. How do you feel about those? If you can get that granular for someone who is just like, I have health goals and I want to achieve them.
For the one like you're describing, I assume you're holding on to like a handle and it has like a bioelectrical impedance type thing.
Yes.
So I think they're okay as a proxy if you're like, hey, I have it, I like it, I can compare it against itself. But in terms of actual accuracy, like the ones like that, if you're dehydrated or you're overhydrated, it's going to read completely different. So because it's going through the water in your body, to me, if you told me, hey, you're going to get a DEXA every 3 months or so, like a DEXA scan, those are the gold standard. So if you're like, I want to know bone mineral density, fat-free mass, fat mass, water weight, all that, I would just say the heck with the the little thing. Unless you want to just know on the weekly, I would just go get a DEXA every quarter. Okay. That's my humble opinion, because at least you'll know you're getting the top of the top of the top line. That's the least, invasive. And it depends where you are, but they're not crazy expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I might actually do that. I really am fascinated. I want to know how much muscle mass I have. The scale is a liar. Okay. I don't like it. It's not fair, especially for us ladies. Wow. This has been such an interesting conversation. I hope it's blessed people, because it's blessed me. I love learning about this. And I think that, again, even for folks that don't have a diabetes diagnosis, either someone that does, or blood sugar is so relevant to you. Like, I think that that's so important for people. And I'm happy that a lot more people are talking about it, because I think it's a huge health lever that we can pull, managing your blood sugar. Anything else from you, Joe?
Awesome. Ben, you're a stud, bro. Thanks for coming on, man. This is awesome.
Yeah, this has been super fun. Tell people where they can find you and connect with you and learn more from you.
Absolutely. So my Instagram and TikTok are both at Man of Zeal. So MANOFTZEEL. And then a website, if someone's interested in potentially learning more about our team and what we do, would be yourdiabetesinsider.com.
Love that. Awesome. Everyone go check them out. Give them a follow. Go to that site and learn more. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Ben.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast. This is one of the most fun podcasts I've done.
Oh, I love that. I'm so glad. I'm glad our chit-chatting has been a good time.
Once we hit end, we'll get the real story.
He'll be like, that was awful, guys.
Right on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to today's podcast sponsor, Ancestral Supplements. You guys have been messaging me, telling me that you've tried the protein and you've fallen in love, and you absolutely both love the flavor. You love that it's bone broth based, so it's not necessarily going to be from whey source. And then you also love the texture. It's so rich and creamy without feeling like too thick and gummy in the mouth. And what I do is I just mix it with my raw milk. I don't even put ice in there. Although if you wanted to, that would be delicious as well. Go check it out. Go try the Ancestral Supplement protein powder if you haven't yet, and I would love to hear your thoughts. You can save 15% with code homegrown at checkout if you hop over to ancestralsupplements.com/homegrown.